Welcome to the official episode 1 of the Together in Battle campaign creation guide. In today's video, we're going to talk about how you create a new campaign and create your starting roster of characters. First thing you do when you create a new campaign is click the New Campaign button. You will notice in the tooltip right there it says that your campaign will be created in My Games, Together in Battle, Custom Campaigns. If you're in Windows, that is the folder location where your campaign will be created in case you want to do manual edits on any of the files, and in case you want to add things like custom portraits. So just bear that in mind. We're going to click this, and the campaign creator asks us what we want to name our campaign. I'm just going to name this Example Campaign, and it's going to ask us for a short description of the campaign here. An example campaign created for the video guide. And voila. So when you create a new campaign, you will notice that we get this little window here that walks us through the process of working on our custom campaign. The very first thing it tells us is that we have this cutscene here called Introduction, which sets up the story and allows us to create our starting roster of characters. But there's something we have to do first. We have to actually have characters to add to the roster, right? If we don't have characters, there's no one to put in the introductory roster in our introduction. So before we work on that, we need to come over here to the character creator and create our starting characters. One quick thing to note before we get into making characters, if you decide you want to edit the name or description of your campaign, just click it, and it'll give you the option to edit it like so. And voila! We now have edited the description. Here we are in the character editor. So the very first thing it asks us when we show up is, do we want to create a unique character or do we want to create a generic character? Obviously, since we're creating characters for the player to recruit, we're going to be starting with uniques. These are characters that have their own distinct portraits, names, and so on. Once you start creating a unique character, you then have to pick a species. Right now, the engine supports 6 different species. You've got your humans, you've got licit, aka lizard men, you've got shadowlings, those little floating cannonball-looking guys. We've got spriggets that have wings and can breathe breath attacks of various elements. There are spirits, which are basically just ghosts. And of course, there are golems. Those are your steam-powered automatons. Let's go with human to start here. So every class in the game, including advanced promotion classes, are available on this screen. Let's just go ahead and pick a basic class like swordsman. So we can pick basically any sort of gender we want for a character. There are sprites and portrait assets that correspond to masculine or feminine, but if you want, you can also assign custom pronouns down here. Changing is mainly for generic characters, right? These are characters that every time they spawn, they will be a randomly chosen gender. We don't really necessarily want to use that for a unique character, although you could, I guess, if you really wanted to. Here we're not going to. We're going to go with masculine. Everything you see on this next screen is new to Together in Battle, and it's optional. You do not have to pick a personality, you do not have to pick physical traits, and you do not have to pick a background. But if you're going to do things like have the game generate dialogue for your character, you definitely want to at least pick a personality archetype. So let's say suave. That's a good one. Physical traits. These are things that can show up on the character screen. Backgrounds, these can have impacts on a character's abilities, but they also can affect dialogue, so it is helpful to pick one. So our character used to be a farmer, he's suave, he's sweaty, and he's afraid of, getting into water. Alright, now is the portrait screen. Here we can click the randomize button over and over to just get a random portrait until there's something we like that we can work off of. And then we can edit all kinds of things. We can edit the scale of the portrait. If we want this guy to be a bit bigger, we can increase that. We can change the skin palette. We can change the color of his eyes. We can change the color of his hair, head shape, hairstyle, eye type, mouth type, nose shape, and so on. Could even give him a cat nose if we wanted. And there's a way to create your own custom assets that then get incorporated into the options here. That's outside the scope of this particular video, but I do talk about that in some other stuff, which I will link in the description here. Okay, so those are the basics of editing a portrait, but there's more. You might notice some buttons down here. First of all, we've got Choose Expression. This lets us pick what his default facial expression is in his portrait. Just because someone has certain facial features, that doesn't mean they're going to always have the same expression. If this guy's a little bit mean-spirited, you could have him look mean in his portrait by default, and that's how he'll show up in the UI. His expression can still change during dialogue, of course. This is just the default expression. You can also give him accessories. So we could give him a tattoo, or we could say, nah, no tattoos. We could give him a beard. We could have him wear a mask by default if we so desired, or a blindfold. I actually kind of like how that mask looks on him. Let's keep that. Could give him a hat. Can wear a crown. Give him some ears. We'll skip that. Glasses. Glasses don't really go with the mask, so we would want to probably pick one or the other there. I do like the monocle. Let's give him a monocle. You will also notice when you are on this screen, there's a button down here that says Custom Portrait. If we click it, it's probably going to give us an error message. Yeah, so when you click this, it looks in your campaign's portraits folder. And if it finds portraits in there, it will pop up a window so that you can select one. I'm going to go ahead and drop a portrait graphic in the portraits folder for this campaign so that you can see what it looks like to select one of those. All right, so now I've created a static custom portrait inside this campaign's portraits folder. So now when I click custom portrait, it detects it, it pulls it up in this little window, and I can click it, and I can hit confirm, and now suddenly, voila, that is my character's portrait. And you can do that to import any static portrait you like if you don't want to go with the generated portraits that this game offers. So let's pick a name that I came up with. Jack Protagonistman. And let's move on. So on this particular screen, we are setting growths. As with every other screen, there's a randomize button that you can click to have the game just come up with new ones for you. You will notice there's a little asterisk here by growths. And if you read this note, it explains how growths work in Together in Battle. They're a little different from games like Fire Emblem or Unicorn Overlord. In this game, it's not nearly so swingy. It's not possible to get a level up where you get no stats. It's not possible to get a level up where you get wildly different numbers of stats. There is instead a default number of stats you're going to gain every level up with a character. Sometimes you'll get a bonus stat. By default, that's usually 2. So the way that growths work is instead of each of them being a percentage chance for each stat individually to level up, or to increase rather, upon level up, instead you should think of them as cards in a deck. Here, for example, you've got 4 health, 3 energy, 3 strength, 1 reflexes, 1 counter limit. Imagine each of those as the number of cards of that type. You shuffle them together. You shuffle the deck, you draw your top card. There is a 4 out of, let's see, it's 4, 7, 10, 12. So a 4 in 12 chance that you will draw health when this character levels up. A 3 in 12 chance of getting energy, 3 and 12 of getting strength, and so on. Whichever one you draw, the rest of the number of cards in the metaphorical deck of that type are thrown out, and then you draw again to get the next stat. So if, for example, Jack Protagonistman leveled up, his health increased as a result, we would discard the remaining 3 health quote-unquote cards from the metaphorical deck. Because this works this way, every time you increase a stat growth, it will decrease slightly the chance of the game picking the other stats. That having been said, the game takes whatever growths you put in on the previous screen and it uses it in combination with your character's species and class to create a starting stat line. You don't have to accept it. You can just edit however you want here. Another thing you can do, this little randomize button actually will level up your character to a certain level using the game's level up rules. So let's say we want Jack Protagonistman to be level 10. We hit apply, and voila, it has generated a stat line for Jack using those growths if he had reached level 10, just randomly using those growths. But because there's a degree of randomness in this, you can re-roll it. Here he has a totally different stat line for level 10, and you can just kind of keep going until you get something you like. Here he's gotten reflexes twice, so you can see he has 2 reflexes, and that has come at the expense of some of the other things he could have increased. For our purposes here, let's leave him at level 1, because this is going to be a campaign where our main character starts at level 1 and grows and improves through the player playing them, which I think a lot of people will find more satisfying. So let's proceed. So now we're on the Masteries, Skills, and Tags screen, and you will also see that we have something called Skill Progression. Just as with the other screens, we can click Randomize here, and the game will just give us a bunch of stuff that makes sense for this character at his current level. So let's start with Masteries. Masteries tell us what kinds of equipment the character can use. What kinds of weapons, what kinds of armor, what kinds of offhand equipment, and so on. So as a level 1 swordsman, Jack is going to start out with the ability to equip swords, with the ability to equip light armor, the ability to equip small shields, and he can also, instead of a shield, he can equip a mangoche in his offhand. There are other things that he will learn later that are also masteries, and if you look all the way down here in skill progression, you'll see some of them. At level 6, he's going to learn medium armor mastery, and at level 13, he's going to learn rapier mastery. If we wanted to, we could just be like, nah, he starts with that, and just type it up in here. The game has an autocomplete feature, so if you start typing the name of a mastery, it'll pop it up, you can click it, and it'll just put it in. In this case, though, let's stick with him not starting out with medium armor mastery. You will note that he does not start with any skills. That is normal for a sort of a physical attacker class in this engine. As a level 1, really, he's not going to have anything other than the ability to swing a sword. And a sword, so if he equips a sword, that is going to grant him the skill sword. We actually don't want to just give him sword here. Because if we do this, if we select sword and we say, okay, you start with sword, then even if he doesn't have a sword equipped, he's going to be able to use the sword attack, which is a little weird. I mean, if you wanted to do that, you could. Obviously, the game lets you, but for our purposes, and I think in most campaigns, it makes more sense not to give a basic melee skill like sword, and instead to have it be granted by the equipment that he puts in his weapon hand, which is in turn granted by the corresponding equipment mastery. I hope that made sense. This also means that if he, reclasses, right, if he becomes a spearman and he gains the spear mastery, then he has a choice of equipping either a sword or a spear, and which attacks he'll have available will depend on what he has equipped, instead of him always being able to use the sword attack, even if he's got, for example, a spear equipped. I just think that makes a little more sense. Down below skills, you will see tags. This is kind of an advanced thing. We're going to skip over this for now because this is going to be something we discuss a lot more when we talk about battles. But there are certain properties, let's just put it that way. There are certain properties of characters you can edit by giving them tags. And you can put that in here if you want a character to start out with certain tags. For now, we're just going to skip over this. And of course, the skill progression, we've already kind of talked about this, at least in terms of masteries, but there's a lot more things than just masteries you get in the skill progression. As the name suggests, you gain skills as you progress. So here at level 2, Jack is going to gain a new skill called Shove. And we can see that represented here in our, let's see, it's going to be right here. There's Shove. Push the target 1 space, costs 0 energy, deals 0 damage, 100% accuracy, range of 1, element falling. Right? That tells you all the basic stuff you need to know. If you want a character to gain a skill as part of their skill progression, you just open up this window, you type in the level that you want them to gain it at. Let's say we really want them to learn something at level 26, let's say Kinetic Gust. And then we just click it. And voila, just like that, it has been added to the skill progression. If you ever see something you don't want them to learn, like, I don't know, maybe you just don't like them learning Lunge at level 16 for whatever reason, boom. Just delete it, you're good. You'll notice that some of these say true or false at the end. Don't worry about that. That's not super important. That's just something the game keeps track of internally. And you'll notice it didn't even put it at the end of this new one here. It will generate that on its own. You can safely ignore it. And if we didn't like this, right, and we wanted the game to just give us a new skill progression, new starting skills, new equipment masteries, and so on, we could click randomize here to have it give us a different one over and over. We're just not gonna. We're gonna say that this is good, we're happy with this, and we'll move on to the next thing. By the way, if we ever decide we want to go back, like let's say I decided, you know what, actually I do not like the name Jack Protagonistman, or actually I've decided I want to tweak his growths or his starting stats, we just click this back button here in the top left and go back to the screen we want, and then proceed back to where we were. All right, this is the inventory, counterattacks, and on-death attack screen. Inventory is exactly what it sounds like. It is the items and equipment that your character starts out with. At the start of the game, there are a whole bunch of items that you can give them to start out the game. Let's see. Do we really want to... Yeah, I guess we'll start him with an iron sword. Maybe some leather armor. And... oh, I don't know. How about some bandages? All right, that makes sense. If your character is starting out with equipment, like the iron sword or the leather armor we see here, if you want them to have it equipped when they start out the game, instead of forcing the player to equip it, what you're going to do is type open square brackets, capital E, closed square brackets. That tells the game, hey, this starts out equipped. And we can also put this for our leather armor here. It's just a good practice to do that so that the game knows, hey, don't just have this sitting in their inventory, actually have it equipped when they start. Counterattacks. This just tells the game, hey, if this character gets attacked and they have this skill available, try to have them counterattack with it. Characters can counterattack with more skills than just a basic skill like sword. We could have him try to counterattack with, I don't know, let's see, what's another skill he has? So eventually he's going to learn... he doesn't have overhead slice. Let's see if we can give him that in his progression here. Overhead strike, sorry, that's the name of it. Okay, so let's have him learn that at level 4. Overhead strike, very good. All right, that's gotten stuck on the end, but doesn't really matter. He will learn it at level 4, even though it is the last in this list. Confirm. And now, if we wanted him to also have that as a counterattack, we can say, okay, overhead strike, and just like that, he will have it available. Let me actually just double check the, yeah, okay. So actually, we don't want to use a comma, that was bad. We want to use a / here. So overhead strike, And if he knows overhead strike and he gets attacked, the game will consider this as a counterattack option. Right? That's how you do that. On death attack, this is something you're very rarely going to use, but if a character does something when they die, if you want them to do something when they die, you type in an on death attack, and that they will try to execute that skill if and when they fall in battle. So one particularly obvious example of an on death attack is satchel charges, right? When satchel charges are brought to 0 health, they explode. If you wanted, you could do something like that for a character. Most of the time you're not going to, but it is an option in this engine. All right, now we're getting to the dialogue. Here is where that personality trait that we picked earlier really pays off. We can just have the game randomize dialogue. So here it has picked a deployment bark for Jack, knowing that he is a suave character. Why, if I didn't know better, I'd say they meant to fight us. Right? That's a suave line. And so on. Right. Obviously, you don't have to just pick a randomized one. You can type your own. And there's a lot of different lines of different types that the game uses. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time writing custom ones here, but you can do it. And the game will support it, obviously. One thing to note is camp activities. If you've played the main campaign in Together in Battle, you know exactly what camp activities are. These are the things characters do sometimes in the evening when you go back to camp. Unless your campaign uses the camp system, this is never going to matter. But if you do want to use the camp system, if you do want characters to have their little social sim interactions like you get in the main campaign and Together in Battle, then you need to make sure you fill this out with camp activities. And Randomize is going to give you a whole bunch of examples of things characters could have as their camp activities. And so on. Let's confirm. And we're good to go. Here we have Jack Protagonistman, our level 1 swordsman. We can see he comes with his iron sword and his leather armor equipped. He has got bandages. He has got 10 strength when you account for the boost he gets from his sword, 31 health, 15 energy, 4 move, 1 counterattack. He is aquaphobic. He is sweaty. He knows how to use sword because he's got this sword equipped and it grants the sword skill. He is good to go. All we have to do now is click save character, and boom, he is saved. Now, if we ever decide we want to load Jack and edit him some more, we've got this button. We can load him. We can also load a bunch of other characters that the game sort of gives us by default, and we can use them as sort of a template to edit a new character if we so desire. So, that having been said, now having gone through all that, I want to note, you don't have to create all of your characters from scratch in the way that I just did. You have an option up here to randomize characters. We can generate a character at random. We can pick their level. We can pick all of the possible species they could be. And if we want them to be a specific class, we can type that in here, and the game will generate a character of that class. Let's say that we really want Jack to have an ally who is a bowman. A human bowman who's level 1 specifically. All we have to do is set it up like that, hit proceed, and boom. We now have Abernathy Shining Star, a level 1 bowman. And oh, this guy actually he starts with aim, which is surprising. It's a little more advanced. And he also starts with place snare trap, which is neat. The game probably picked a background as like a trapper, or perhaps a bounty hunter for this character. So if we like him, we can hit save and he'll become part of the roster. But if we want to go for something else, we just hit don't, and we generate again. Let's see what we get this time. Ah, Rosemary Flower Thicket, of course. Yeah, there we go. She starts with an old steel bow. She has bad joints, but she's energetic, so she's got a lot of energy to start with. Yeah, let's have our little friend Rosemary here join the team. Save character. And we can just kind of keep doing this. We can just keep rolling characters. And if we like, we can specify their class. And in this way, we can sort of create a bunch of characters who are going to be available for us to use in the starting roster. I'm going to point out one more thing here, and that is the guide. This yellow button you see up here opens this screen. It says it's the guide, and what the guide is an in-game reference to all kinds of stuff that you might want to know when you're making characters, creating scenes, scripting, etc. So, for example, if you were on the growth screen and you weren't happy with the game's sort of default tooltip explanations of the stats, you could click this in the guide and get a more, potentially a more thorough explanation of how some of these stats work. And note that some of these stats, like energy percent left, aren't actually editable in the character creator. They're things that you can pull from in script. We'll get to that later, don't worry. But you can also look at things like tags. So if you wanted to look and see, okay, but what are all of the tags I could put on my characters? They're all here, right? You can just look it up by clicking this button. All right, one last thing, and then I promise we're done with the video, and that is I want to show you about generic units. So generics are very similar to unique units, but they have a few differences, right? Generic characters, they're not like, recruitable main characters. They're not going to be like your unique named boss units. Generics are like Castle Guard or Axe Bandit or, it's just a type of enemy that doesn't get its own unique portrait or name or personality or any of that. So if we click generic, it will take us through, it'll look at first like it's the same as before, right? We're picking a species, we're picking a class, but one big difference, we probably, unless we very specifically want this to be one gender or the other, we're probably going to pick changing so that the game will randomly choose, okay, when this character shows up, it's either going to be, we're not going to just have like every enemy of this kind is a dude or every enemy of this kind is a woman. Okay, so let's just go ahead and say that the name of this particular enemy is Bandit Chopper. Every time one of these units shows up, they're going to be named Bandit Chopper. And just like before, we get to pick growths and stats. You will notice that we skipped the portrait. That is because this is a generic unit. It is just going to give us the generic unit portrait for that class. This is a generic axe fighter. And here it is randomly chosen, the female generic axe fighter, but in the game, it could be a man, it could be a woman, you don't know. It could just as easily have picked a guy bandit chopper. So again, we can randomize, and we can make these guys like a little weaker, right? Maybe we don't want these enemies to start with a counterattack. Maybe we want them to have a little less health. Maybe we want them to have less energy. And maybe we don't want these guys showing up with droppable weapons at all. Maybe we want to actually increase their strength a little bit so that, unlike our named protagonist characters, they do start with just a base level, unlimited use weapon skill not attached to droppable equipment. In that vein, let's give our Bandit Chopper strength 5, and we'll randomize their starting skills and stuff. And for skills, let's give them Axe as a default skill. And you'll notice here it's showing that Axe will deal 5 damage. That is because their strength is 5. And for the most part, we're just not going to give these guys equipped weapons. So it's okay for them to have the axe skill as a natural skill. And here we can see, all right, they've got a skill progression. They can learn pull, throwing axe mastery, grappler stance, shove. Yeah, I would probably change this. Throwing axe mastery, yeah, I mean, that's fine. Grappler stance, nah. We don't really need them learning that. Let's have them learn shove at level 6. Book of Power Mastery, nah. Book of Power, if you haven't played the main game, that is an item that behaves a lot like a Master Seal in Fire Emblem. It automatically promotes the character that uses it to an advanced class. The AI doesn't really know how to use a Book of Power, at least right now, so not necessarily a super great idea to give them Book of Power Mastery. And let's see. Do we really want them to learn pull at level 2? Sure, I suppose. Throwing axe mastery at level 4? Yeah, I guess that's fine. Shove at level 6? Makes sense. Overhead chop at level 9? Yeah, that's fine. Let's shift these back a little bit, though, just to make them more interesting a little faster. Let's give them armor rend at level 11. Pull 2? Nah, we'll skip that. Energy proficiency. I have not talked about proficiencies yet. This is actually an important thing to know. If you're not familiar with the main game, sometimes when a character levels up, they will gain a bonus stat in something. And that is called a stat proficiency, or a bonus stat proficiency. So any stat that they can have, you can give them a proficiency when they reach a certain level, and it will be as if that stat had leveled up. So here at level 16, the Bandit Chopper gains energy proficiency, so in addition to their 2 normal stats that they increase on level up, they will also gain energy. Let's give them health proficiency instead. Level 17, nah, let's move that back to 18, and let's give them strength proficiency. 19, yeah, let's move that back a little. At level 20, they gain whirlwind. And at level 22, they gain small shield mastery. All right, that's fine. We can do that. And we'll confirm. Counterattacks, axe, that is perfect. On death attack, we don't really want them to have one of those. Inventory, we don't have to really set an inventory here, because you'll see when we get to create battles, we can individually edit the inventory of each instance of an enemy. If we edit the inventory here, then every single Bandit Chopper we place down will start with these items in their inventory. We're not going to do that, at least in this example, but you could if you wanted. Let's just confirm and move on. And voila. As you can see, there is not a ton of customization in terms of, like dialogue or personal appearance, but those are things we can script in the map editor on a per battle basis. We'll talk about how to do that in the next episode. Actually, it probably won't be the next episode. We'll talk about how to do that in 2 episodes when we get to talking about how to create battles. But for now, I think this is it. In our next episode, we will talk about how to actually create the starting roster and how to create your introductory cutscene in the cutscene editor. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.